What if I told you that in 1993, a renowned surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital performed a 7-hour emergency surgery that saved someone's life? But that patient never existed. That multiple medical staff witnessed the procedure, signed off on surgical reports, and disposed of bloodied instruments. Yet there are no admission records, no insurance claims, and most disturbing of all, no body was ever found. This is the story of Dr. Marcus Bellwether, and the case that would destroy his career, shatter his sanity, and leave investigators with more questions than answers, because sometimes, the most terrifying mysteries aren't about what we can't explain, but about what we remember too clearly. It was 3:17 a.m. on October 13th, when the emergency doors of St. Mary's Hospital burst open. A woman, in her 30s, pale as moonlight, was rushed in on a stretcher. Her abdomen was grotesquely distended, and she was conscious but silent, staring at the ceiling with eyes that nurses later described as too dark, like looking into empty wells. Dr. Bellwether, the hospital's most experienced surgeon, was called in immediately. He'd performed over 2,000 operations in his 20-year career and had never lost a patient. But what he saw that night would haunt him forever. The woman's condition was unlike anything in medical literature. Her internal organs had somehow become twisted and fused together in patterns that defied human anatomy. Her heart was beating, but it had relocated to the wrong side of her chest cavity. Her liver was split into 7 distinct pieces, each functioning independently. Most impossibly, she had what appeared to be a second set of ribs growing inward, creating a cage within a cage. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. Dr. Bellwether assembled his best team: Nurse Patricia Collins, who had assisted in over 500 surgeries; anesthesiologist Dr. Robert Hayes, who had never had a patient wake up during an operation; and surgical technician James Morrison, whose steady hands had earned him respect throughout the hospital. They all remember her. They all remember everything that happened next. The surgery began at 4:45 a.m. What should have been impossible became routine as Dr. Bellwether methodically untangled organs that had grown together like living rope. The woman's blood was unusually thick, almost black under the surgical lights. When they opened her chest cavity, her heart was beating in reverse, pumping blood backward through her veins. Nurse Collins documented every bizarre detail in her surgical notes. The patient's temperature was 86 degrees, far too low for survival, yet she showed no signs of hypothermia. Her blood pressure readings kept changing, even though she was under full anesthesia. Most disturbing, when they removed the malformed tissue from her abdomen, it continued moving for several minutes after being severed from her body. Dr. Hayes later testified that he'd never seen anything like her brain activity during the operation. The monitors showed patterns that resembled dreams, but she was unconscious. When he increased the anesthesia, the patterns became more active, not less. For 7 hours, they worked to rebuild a human being who shouldn't have survived her condition. Dr. Bellwether later said it was like performing surgery on someone who was simultaneously alive and dead, as if her body couldn't decide which state it preferred. At 11:52 a.m., they finished. The woman's vital signs stabilized. Her organs were functioning normally. Dr. Bellwether had performed what many would call a miracle. They wheeled her to the recovery room, where she would be monitored until she regained consciousness. Nurse Collins checked on her every 15 minutes, as protocol demanded. The woman remained stable, breathing steadily, her color returning to something resembling normal. Then, at 2:30 p.m., Nurse Collins entered the recovery room for her routine check and found the bed empty. Not just empty, pristine. The sheets were perfectly clean. Hospital corners still tucked tight. No indentation where a body had been lying. No warmth from someone who had been recovering from major surgery just minutes before. But here's where the story becomes truly terrifying. When Nurse Collins ran to get Dr. Bellwether, he insisted they check the admission records. There was no record of any emergency patient being brought in the night before. No insurance information, no next of kin contacts, no medical history. The emergency room logs showed no ambulance arrivals between midnight and 6 a.m. The surgical suite where they had operated was completely clean, as if it had never been used. The instruments they had used were back in their sterilization units, showing no signs of recent use. The blood samples they had taken were gone from the lab. Most impossibly, the surgical reports that Nurse Collins had meticulously completed during the operation were missing from the files, but she remembered writing them. Dr. Hayes remembered reviewing the anesthesia logs. James Morrison remembered disposing of the contaminated materials. They all remembered her face. Hospital administration launched an immediate investigation. Security cameras showed the 4 medical staff entering and leaving the surgical suite. But no patient was ever visible on any footage. The cameras showed them working for 7 hours in what appeared to be an empty operating room, moving around instruments that cast shadows but working on a patient that never appeared on film. But the most chilling discovery came when investigators reviewed the hospital's blood bank records. During the surgery, the team had used 6 units of type AB negative blood, one of the rarest blood types. The blood bank confirmed that 6 units had been withdrawn from storage that night, but those same 6 units were still in the refrigerator, sealed and unused. With no record of them ever being checked out, Dr. Bellwether underwent psychiatric evaluation. The hospital assumed he had suffered some kind of psychotic break and had convinced his team to participate in an elaborate hallucination. But all 4 medical staff passed psychological testing with perfect results. They were deemed completely sane and competent. The case attracted attention from medical journals, paranormal investigators, and even government agencies interested in unexplained phenomena. But no explanation ever satisfied the evidence. Dr. Hayes left medicine entirely and became a carpenter. He said he couldn't trust his own perceptions anymore. James Morrison transferred to a different hospital and never spoke about that night again. Nurse Collins continued working, but requested to never be assigned to emergency surgeries. Dr. Bellwether's career was destroyed. No hospital would hire a surgeon who claimed to have operated on a non-existent patient. He lost his medical license, his reputation, and eventually his family. He spent his remaining years obsessed with finding proof that the woman had existed, tracking down similar cases, traveling to medical conferences to tell anyone who would listen about the night he saved someone who was never there. He died in 2007, alone in a small apartment, surrounded by medical journals and photographs of surgical scars on patients who didn't exist. But the story doesn't end there. In 2012, during renovations of St. Mary's Hospital, construction workers discovered something in the walls of the old surgical suite where the operation had taken place. Hidden behind decades of paint and plaster, they found scratches in the concrete. Deliberate marks that spelled out words. "Thank you for fixing me." The scratches were deep, carved into the concrete as if made by fingernails, but analysis showed they had been made from inside the wall. Impossible unless someone had been sealed inside the structure itself. More disturbing, DNA analysis of material found in the scratches matched blood samples that Dr. Bell had secretly kept from the surgery, samples he had hidden in his home freezer for 20 years, hoping to someday prove his story was real. But those blood samples had been tested by multiple laboratories and showed something that contradicts everything we know about human biology. The DNA was human, but it contained sequences that don't exist in any known genetic database. It was as if the woman's genetic code included instructions for biological processes that humans don't possess. Some researchers theorized that Dr. Bellwether and his team had encountered something that existed between life and death. A person who had died but whose body refused to accept that reality. Others suggested they had operated on someone from a parallel dimension. Someone who existed in their world for just long enough to receive the medical care she needed before returning to wherever she came from. But perhaps the most terrifying theory came from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist who studied the case files. She proposed that the woman had existed in a quantum superposition, simultaneously alive and dead, real and imaginary, until the act of medical observation forced reality to choose one state. And reality chose to erase her existence entirely, leaving only the memories of those who had tried to save her. Today, St. Mary's Hospital operates normally. The surgical suite has been converted into storage space. Most of the staff from 1993 have retired or moved away. But sometimes, late at night, security guards report hearing sounds from the old operating room. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the hiss of ventilators, and occasionally, the voice of a woman saying thank you in a language that doesn't quite sound human. That official medical record states that no surgery took place on October 13, 1993. But for people remember 7 hours of the most challenging medical procedure of their careers. They remember saving a life that shouldn't have existed. And somewhere, in a place between memory and reality, a woman with impossibly dark eyes walks through a world where she was never supposed to be, carrying surgical scars that prove someone, somewhere, cared enough to try to fix what was broken. The question isn't whether Dr. Bellwether and his team were telling the truth. The question is whether the truth is something our reality is willing to accept. Because sometimes, the most profound act of healing is not saving a life, but remembering that a life existed at all, even when the universe itself tries to forget.